cose, come avete sentito non è possibile fare fotografie o registrare. Alla fine dell'incontro, che durerà circa un'ora e un quarto, Quentin Tarantino leggerà alcuni brani del suo libro Cinema Speculation, pubblicato con la nave di Teseo. Non voglio perdere tempo. Signori, un genio del cinema, Quentin Tarantino.
What was interesting about the Tiffany Theater was I saw really at a very, very, very young age, a very intense double feature at that theater. John Alvinson's Joe with Peter Boyle and Carl Reiner's Where's Papa with George Segal and Ruth Gordon. And I saw it in 1970, so I was about, 7 or something like that. And that was a very wild night. I remembered it so much that it's how I opened my book. But one of the things about the Tiffany that was very interesting about it was the only theater in Hollywood that kind of catered to the counterculture. Because all the other theaters, it's like, there was kind of two kinds of Hollywood going on in 1970. There was, when I say Hollywood, I don't mean the movies, I mean the city of Hollywood. There was, the last refuge of old Hollywood was Hollywood Boulevard, which during the day, tourists would go to. And that's where most of the theaters were located, the Chinese theater, the Vogue, the Egyptian. But then once the sun went down, Hollywood turned into Hollyweird. And that's when the people of the night would come out, and that's where the place got kind of scary, especially for a little boy with his parents. Like, what the fuck's going on here? But the thing about the Tiffany Theater is it wasn't on Hollywood Boulevard, it was on Sunset Boulevard. But not just Sunset Boulevard, it was Sunset Boulevard west of La Brea, which made it the Sunset Strip. And that was the area for, that was the rock area. That was not the area defined by movies. That was the area defined by the rock clubs, by the Whiskey A Go-Go, the London Fog, Pandora's Box, places like that. And the big billboards weren't really for movies that much, but for the new albums coming out. And, and right there, all by itself, across the street from Ben Frank's coffee shop, was the Tiffany Theater. And the thing is, the Tiffany didn't show Oliver, or Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, or Goodbye Mr. Chips, or even Thunderball. The Tiffany showed Woodstock, Gimme Shelter.
What kind of people was there? The audience?
Well, it was like being a little kid there, it was a very appreciative audience, but for the most part, for those kind of movies, for the head flick movies, like Andy Warhol's Frankenstein or something like that, or Yellow Submarine. No, that was a lot of hippies. There was a lot of hippies dropping acid, smoking pot, and going to the Tiffany Theater.
What was your reaction watching when you were only 7-year-old? Where's Papa and Joe?
Well, they were two different reactions to the two very, very different movies. Joe was probably the ugliest movie I had ever seen at that time. And when I say ugly, I don't mean it was just not pretty, even though it wasn't pretty. I mean, the whole concept of it, the whole thing about it is kind of an ugly movie. And, but it was still kind of a comedy. Now, not that I thought it was super funny as a little boy, but Joe's cursing up a storm, and that's always kind of funny for a kid. All right, but the audience thought it was funny. The audience was really, really digging it, and I was digging them digging it. But in the case of Where's Papa, which was more overtly comic, and again, one of the things is when I watched Joe, one of the things about, I'll quickly say, the whole thing about Joe is a businessman loses his daughter to the drug culture. She runs away with a hippie guy. He goes to her apartment, finds the hippie scumbag boyfriend there, and ends up bashing his head in. And then so he's, oh my God, I just killed somebody. He goes to a bar, and then there's this hard hat loudmouth there, saying, doing America, love it or leave it, man, fucking hippies, the fucking blacks, this and that and the other. Somebody ought to kill them all. And then this guy goes, well, I actually did. And then they sort of kind of create this weird alliance together until at the end they go, they get automatic rifles and go to a hippie commune and start executing hippies. And then in the melee, the father accidentally shoots his daughter. Ha ha. Okay. And so I remember when we're driving home from that movie. I'll get to Where's Papa in a second. We're driving home from that movie, and my mom says, I'm glad Quentin fell asleep at the end of that film. I wouldn't have wanted him to see, that ending. And so I'm in the back saying, like, whoa, what happened? And my stepdad, Kurt, and then, well, Joe and the father took some guns, and they went to a hippie commune, and they started killing hippies, and then they ended up killing the father's daughter. He shot his daughter. Why? Even the hippie from the beginning? Yeah, the hippie from the beginning. Why? Well, he didn't mean to shoot her. It was, he didn't mean to shoot her. Oh, was he sad? Yes, Quentin, he was very sad. So, but I didn't see that because I fell asleep. Being a little kid, I fell asleep. All right, so I missed that whole part. But like when the lights came on, after the movie was over, I woke up, and then the more overtly comic Where's Papa started. And right from the beginning, I was glued. Because right from the beginning, George Siegel puts on a gorilla suit, and he jumps on his mother's bed, played by Ruth Gordon, and she punches him in the nuts. Okay, now, when you're 7 years old, the height of comic, the pinnacle of comedy, is a guy in a gorilla suit. And the only thing funnier than that is a guy getting punched in the nuts. So when you have a guy getting punched in the nuts in a gorilla suit, well, that's as great as comedy can ever get, So I was like, oh, I'm gonna watch this all the way to the fucking end.
Let me say just the Italian titles of these two films. La guerra privata del soldato Joe, del cittadino Joe è il primo, il secondo si chiama Senza un filo di classe. I just want to say a couple of things about this book, Cinema Speculation. It's quite incredible. It's like watching one of his films. And I want to thank you for this. Before we show clips, in that cover, which is the American cover, you show Sam Peckinpah and Steve McQueen on the set of
The Getaway.
The Getaway. Why did you pick that particular picture?
What? Because it's such a fucking great picture, man. It is a great picture. I'm proud to have that on the cover of my book, and in America we make posters of it, all right, for bookstores. I'm proud to have the poster. But I thought it would be cool to put a photo from one of the movies that's analyzed inside the book on the cover, and I like the idea of promoting both the artists that Peckinpah and McQueen were, but also their apparent camaraderie.
while watching again the film, you say, at the beginning I believe that Ali Madro plays the leading role, the leading female role in the film, was not so good. But then you change your mind. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Do you think she's a fine actress?
Well, I don't know how. I don't know that she's the greatest actress in the world. She's okay. All right. But in that movie, I think she's really terrific. At that movie, and I didn't feel that forever.
Because the real reason why she's there, because at the time she was married to the producer, and then she left the producer for Steve McQueen.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But the thing is, I mean, he didn't actually produce the movie. There was a time that he was going to produce the movie. But the thing about it, though, was you know, The Getaway is based on a very famous book, and in the book, it's like a bank robbery couple, Doc and Carol McCoy, and they're one of the great bank robbery couples in the history of crime literature. And I kept comparing it to the book, and really, and she's not right. She's not right for the book, and she's not even really right for a Walter Hill screenplay, to tell you the truth. So if that's the Carol McCoy you must have, then she's not going to. Then she's going to be unsatisfactory. But that's not really. But the book is not really the movie that Sam Peckinpah made. He made something else. He made a love story. The Getaway is a love story that disguises itself as a bank robbery movie, even though there's a bank robbery in it. It's about what happens to this couple, how they're almost torn apart from the beginning because things that she has to do in order to get her man out of jail. And that seems like it's going to tear them apart. And then there's the bank robbery, and then they go through living hell trying to get out of Texas into Mexico. And everything seems to tear them apart. And it's about can they stay together? And if they don't stay together, nothing was worth anything. The whole thing was worthless. Now that's not the book at all. The book tears them apart. Peckinpah wants to bring them together. And if you watch the movie, you want McQueen and McGraw to get together. And I think that she does play the realities of a woman trying to hold her relationship together that seems to be crumbling around her. She plays the moment-to-moment reality of that, I think, very, very well.
Before we see the first clip, which one is your favorite Peckinpah film?
The Wild Bunch. That's one of the greatest fucking movies ever made. So yeah, The Wild Bunch.
How about Pat Garrett?
I know, I like Pat Garrett a lot. I like The Getaway more than Pat Garrett. I really, really like Pat Garrett. But to me, Pat Garrett is kind of it's like a collection of set pieces. You know, it's his mostly Oni-esque movie, because it's like, okay, there's this 10-minute sequence, and then there's this 10-minute sequence, and then there's this 15-minute sequence, and I don't think all of them are of equal value, all right? But it's still pretty terrific.
Let's watch the first film, and you might be a little bit surprised by this first choice, and I take the responsibility, because Quentin was a little bit hesitant and say, let's show it. First clip, please.
Perfect night for horseback riding. I was fun with a guy who had horses once.
Oh yeah? I had a couple of horses myself.
Really?
I used them for hunting. I do a lot of hunting, you know. Yeah, deer mostly. Got a couple of bear last year. Yeah, those were good ponies. Had to train them special myself. Took a lot of time.
Yeah, do you still have them? We can go for a ride.
No, I had to sell them to get these wheels. And a Jeep. I got a Jeep pickup with 4-wheel drive. It's got a gun rack on it, and I use that for hunting.
Why do you kill little animals? I think that's terrible.
Oh, well, yeah. I figure with bears, though, it's leave them. You know, I think you're really neat.
Wait a second.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I don't know. I guess maybe it's the booze or something.
Won't you pitch?
I'm sorry. Get my head over here. Okay, you get up. Okay. Ow, my leg, my leg. Oh, watch it. Please. Oh. Please.
I just love talking about upholstery.
Grand Central Station.
No, come on, they won't come out.
Wait. I gotta blanket back.
All right, okay.
Oh.
This is, of course, American Graffiti by George Lucas. I'm sure you know that it's one of the most profitable films ever made.
Yeah, because
It
yeah.
cost only $750,000.
They made like $50 million in 1973.
So it's incredible. We, meaning film critics, film scholars, call this generation the Oliver Renaissance. You have a much better name, the movie brats. Yeah. And what was the importance of this generation? The reason why I'm asking is I noticed that most of the film that you pick, both the clips and the film book, are from the 70s.
Yeah. Oh, well, they're all from the 70s, all right, you know. Yeah, it all follows what I would call the New Hollywood period, where old Hollywood gave away, and then the New Hollywood. I think the New Hollywood period pretty much starts from '67 with Bonnie and Clyde and The Graduate, and goes. I believe. Other people count it differently, but I always think it ends in 1981. You know, like at the end of 1981.
Can I ask you why 1981?
Well, I think there's still enough remnants of the New Hollywood blowout is still coming out. There's like but I think it's
a lot of flops like
No.
Heaven's Gate.
Well, Heaven's Gate came out in '80 and everything. No, but it's like I think there's still enough movies that you could definitely call New Hollywood still coming out in '81. But in '82, little by little, that's where the '80s officially begin. But that's normal though. Most decades don't stop officially on that number 9. They always have a couple year spillover into the next decade. So when I did the book, the idea was I was covering that period, and so I made a decision I was going to cover that period of cinema. I was only going to deal with Hollywood movies, so no foreign films, no Dario Argento, sorry, no Mario Bava, sorry about that, no Sergio Leone, no Carucci, no Kung Fu.
Although, as you know, American Graffiti is influenced by I Vitelloni by Federico Fellini.
Yeah. And so, so I wanted them all to be American movies, and I wanted them all to be movies that I saw back then, when they came out. Nothing that I discovered later. I could have seen it a couple years later on television, maybe. All right, but I had to have seen it back then. Now, what I thought. Now, sometimes in the book, sometimes I deal with what it was like seeing it back then, and sometimes I didn't. But once I wrote that opening chapter, that's where I kind of realized that that's the invisible structure of the movie. But what you're referring to, though, is the Movie Brats was the name that they kind of they gave these young directors that were the first generation of filmmakers that were educated in film school. So they didn't come necessarily from working on television. They didn't come necessarily from working as ADs and working their way up the ladder. And they didn't come from theater. They came from college. They came from film school. They made a short film and somehow got a feature film made. And they were young. And they were very young. They were movie mad, and they wanted to. And as opposed to the generation before them, which I call the anti-establishment auteurs, they were who were like people like Robert Altman or Paul Mazursky or Bob Raffleson. Where to them, I think genre was a bad word, but for the Movie Brats, genre wasn't a bad word. They loved genre, whatever, and they wanted to make the greatest genre movies ever made. And then in the case of George Lucas and Steven Spielberg and Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese, they did.
Let's go back for a second to the Tiffany Theater. I read in the book that the film that traumatized you the most is Bambi. Is that right?
Well, what he's referring to is the idea that, okay, so one of the themes of the book was the fact that my mom and my stepdad at the time, and then later, when they got divorced, her and some of her boyfriends, or dates, took me to the movies that other kids weren't going to see. The other kids weren't allowed to see. It was some really, really rough stuff. But that's good. Those are the coolest, I'm talking about the 70s. These are the coolest movies ever made. And so I'm seeing them right from a very young age. Some of them are going way over my head. All right, but if I made a list of some of the wild imagery that I saw when I was 7, 8, 9, 10, for a lot of people it might curl their hair. But actually it wasn't so bad for me because usually, because I didn't see it in a vacuum. They was all part of a story. I understood how it related to the story. But then I tell these stories and everything, and somebody says okay, and look, and sometimes I saw something that really did disturb me. That didn't mean I didn't like the movie. It just mean that it got to me. But then people would say, okay, well, is there anything that you saw back then that you couldn't handle? I go, yeah, Bambi. I couldn't handle Bambi. And again, part of the reason I couldn't handle it is there was no preparation in the TV spots that they had, or the poster or anything, that the harrowing turn of events that's going to eventually happen in Bambi is going to happen. But when the forest fire happens and it's killing everybody, and then his mom gets shot by the hunter, and Bambi's left on her own, I mean, my God, it was terrifying. But I don't think I'm alone. I think Bambi's been fucking up people for 60 years, if not longer.
Another film that traumatized you, not even the film, the trailer, is Wait Until Dark.
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm asking, because I saw you on stage in Broadway playing the role of the bad guy.
Yeah, I played the Alan Arkin role on Broadway in that. That was one of the things, when I talk about some of these wild things I saw, one of the things I say is that sometimes it wasn't even just the movie, it was the trailers were so scary. And absolutely, and I liked horror films, all right, but absolutely the scariest horror film that I saw in the 70s was the trailer to Wait Until Dark. Not even the movie. I didn't even see Wait Until Dark that much. Many, many years later when it was on TV and it wasn't so bad. All right, but the leap out was pretty good. All right, but that trailer was fucking frightening.
Let me just say the Italian title, Gli occhi della notte, with Audrey Hepburn.
Gli occhi della notte.
Let's watch now the second clip.
Dirty Harry.
Stop!
Get some air, fatso.
Please, no more! I'm hurt! Can't you see I'm hurt? You shot me! Please, don't! Let me have a doctor! Let me have a doctor! Please, give me a doctor! Don't kill me!
The girl, where is she?
You're trying to kill me!
If I tried that, your head would be splattered all over this field. Where's the girl?
I wasn't.
I said, where's the girl?
I have the right for a life!
where's the girl?
I have the right to life. You're done, Jesus. I have right to life.
What a scene.
Yeah. Dirty Harry, maybe the whip out the Dirty Harry.
The Italian title. No, I got it. Ispettore Callaghan, il caso Scorpio 2. It's awful. Detective Callaghan, the Scorpio affair is yours.
Oh, really?
It's my fault, but it's terrible, yes.
But Dirty Harry is maybe especially for it's maybe the most ripped off movie in the history of Italian cinema, because after Dirty Harry came out, the Italians just made one Dirty Harry ripoff after another. Mazzo Morelli, it was his entire career in Dirty Harry.
Why do you like it so much? You will see 2 films by Don Siegel, who was a master, of course. I personally prefer his early masterpiece, The Body Snatchers, but of course this is an incredible film.
Well,
Very controversial too, politically.
yeah, at the time, yeah. I don't think now so much anymore, which almost makes the controversy about it back then kind of interesting and almost comical. No, I think Dirty Harry is just it's a perfect genre piece. It's just, I mean, it's the genre equivalent of a Swiss watch, and I do think that there is this aspect that I make a point in the book about comparing, like, say, Dirty Harry to Steven Spielberg's Jaws. All right, so in Jaws,
Lo squalo.
yeah, okay,
A shark in Italian.
oh, the shark. And so in Jaws, you have the opposite. You have this kind of monster movie with a fish that normally would be done by a studio journeyman, better or worse, depending on who they hired. That is like, okay, we can make a good movie out of this, and we'll do our best, and they'll cast the film, and that's the way the film is going to be. There's a lot of films like that. All right, but in the case of Jaws, you hired a young filmmaking genius who realized exactly what he had when it came to this material, and he knew exactly the kind of movie that he could make out of it that nobody else could make, and that he had never seen before. And he had the passion and the youth and the energy and the talent to put everything in there, put his whole life in there to make that movie as special as it is. Well, Dirty Harry is almost its opposite number. You have a director who's done 20 or so movies, has been working since the very, very late 40s. And at this late part in life, he gets a script. He gets material that he knows is a winner, that he knows he's the one who can deliver the goods like nobody else. And he's doing it in collaboration with a huge superstar that the two of them have a simpatico relationship. And so that nobody else would be able to deliver what Clint Eastwood, what Don Siegel would be able to deliver. And I think it falls along with a couple of other movies from the 70s, Jaws, Star Wars, Young Frankenstein, Annie Hall, is almost a perfect movie from that era.
I couldn't agree more. You make a point in the book by saying that this film would be inconceivable without Clint Eastwood, but even more without Andy Robinson.
Yeah, who plays a Scorpio in the film. Yeah.
What happened to him? He never had a career like.
Well, but his case is one of the weird cases where it's like, if anything, it's just one of those weird things. He's actually almost too good as Scorpio. He was such a revelation as Scorpio, and his cruelty as a character just seemed so beyond the beyond. You almost couldn't imagine that a human being could be this evil, and could be this sadistic and this cruel and this fucked up. I mean, that's still also kind of some strange mastermind at the exact same time. It almost seemed beyond the pale of believability. Well, now, as time is going on, we know exactly how bad some killers can be, and Scorpio isn't a complete figment of anybody's imagination. But the thing about it was, he was so indelible in that role that it was hard to take him. It was hard to think of him as anything else. So whenever he showed up in something, you were like, "Oh wow, fucking Scorpio's in this movie." and I'd like to say, "Oh, that's people's." I'd like to say that I'm better than all that. I would be better than that now as an adult. All right, but when I was a kid, whenever I saw Scorpio show up in something, I'm, "Oh my God, Scorpio's here!"
Scorpio is based on a real serial killer.
Yeah, it's based on the Zodiac Killer. Yeah.
When the film came out, we mentioned before there was some controversy. A lot of respected film critics, including Pauline Kael, I think, consider the film reactionary or even fascist. My question is it true, and who cares? It is not true. What do you think?
No, I don't think the film is fascist. I do think it is reactionary. I think it is, as opposed to a lot of films at that time that were made for the counterculture audience or for the youth audience. Dirty Harry was a movie that wasn't made for them. Dirty Harry was made for their parents. Dirty Harry was made for the Eisenhower generation, who, when they looked out their windows and looked out their car windows and watched their evening news, didn't recognize the country that they had grown up in, and they didn't recognize their children with all their hippie stuff and whatever, and were scared of the ever escalating violence, and just scared of all the boundary pushing that was going on. That was very different from 1962 and 63 and 64.
Why don't we go back to back to another Dan Siegel film?
Sure.
Clip number 3.
How was you? I keep my eye on Don. Pretty upset.
Cons are always upset about something. Put your overalls on.
Mr. Zillman, I'm making a new table. I need a hat.
Bob, get Doc a hat.
This terrible moment really happened in Africa to a committed guy called Bruce Persson. Yeah. Can I ask you, why did you pick this particular? Of course, he picked the sequences. Why did you like?
Oh no, I didn't pick the sequence. I didn't pick that
I was
sequence.
given okay. What do you like about this film? Because it's a typical genre film. You know, it's a jail film.
Well, I think again like Dirty Harry, but in a different way. It's the expertise of its craftsmanship that I really, really respond to. And also the fact that there is an aspect about it. It came out in 1979. There's like no other movie like that in 1979. You know, to one degree or another, it harkens back to Don Siegel's 50s movies. His 50s genre movies like Riot on Cell Block 11 or Babyface Nelson, you know, movies like that. Yeah, it doesn't emulate them. It goes its own way. And also there is a wonderful aspect because it's one of the last movies he did in his career. If he stopped his career with Escape from Alcatraz, it'd be one of the greatest last movies any director ever did. Unfortunately, like a lot of people, he did a couple more. Not so good. Right? But one of the things that's so wonderful about the film is it's him going back to, after a couple of okay movies, but nothing special. It's him going back to two of his past triumphs. One, the first movie he ever did that he considered a good movie was Riot in Cell Block 11, which a lot of people consider one of the greatest prison movies of all time. But also, it was him going back to Clint Eastwood, his greatest collaborator, and so they're doing that together. But then the other thing, one of the things that's really wonderful about it is Don Siegel started his career working in the montage department at Warner Brothers Studios. And so, you know, so like when you see the montages in Casablanca, that's Don Siegel. When you see the montages in a lot of the Michael Curtiz movies, that's Don Siegel. Especially the montages in the Roaring Twenties, some of the most famous montages of all time. And that was his department. Then after that, he moved to the second unit action department. But what was interesting was the fact that once he started directing movies, he bent over backwards not to shoot montages until this movie. And the montages in it of The Escape are some of the maybe the greatest montages of his career. And what's really neat about the way The Escape works in this movie is most prison escapes in movies are like really high-flying affairs. It's all milked for as much suspense as you can. But in this case, you never really know exactly what the plan is. And nothing is telegraphed. It's not like Clint Eastwood is like, you know, walking down the hall and he alone sees this one chink in the armor of the Rock. It's like he alone, he sees it and there's this big eureka moment. No, it doesn't happen like that. It's one little small minutia of opportunity reveals itself. And then he picks at it, and he picks at it, and that reveals another small, slight minutia of opportunity. And one thing kind of leads to the other. But you never have a clear idea of the plan. You know that there is a plan. You know they know what they're doing. So when they're gathering making those paper mache heads and those dummies, you don't have no fucking idea what this is for. What the hell's going on with this? You don't know what anything they're doing is. And so finally they do the escape, and then you're like, oh, that's what that's for. Oh, yay, that's a good idea. Yeah, that. And so it's almost pure visual storytelling.
Can I ask you what do you think of Clint Eastwood as a filmmaker and as an actor?
No, I think he's a fantastic filmmaker. All right. Now he's made a whole lot of movies, and there's a lot of them. There's some that I like more than others. But for the most part, unless he gets a bumper script, I usually fairly enjoy his movies. But some of them I think are really, really terrific. I think Unforgiven is really terrific, but I love The Outlaw Josie Wales.
How about the actor? There is a very nasty line by Sergio Leone.
Yeah, and I always felt bad about that. That always made me disappointed in Leone that he said that.
But do you think he's a good actor?
I think he's a terrific actor.
A huge presence.
Yeah, he's a huge presence, and the thing, and especially as he got older, there's the thing about it is, you don't cast John Wayne to play Henry VIII. All right, you don't cast John Wayne to play a British butler. John Wayne had his persona, and he played his persona. Clint Eastwood, you know, as he got older, he stretched that out. Clint Eastwood had his persona, but inside of that persona, he stretched it quite a bit and played many different types of characters inside of that persona.
I want to thank now Quentin Tarantino for the next clip, because it's a film quite unknown in this country by an unsung hero of American cinema. Let's watch it.
That there is the last American factory-made convertible.
No more convertibles?
No, ma'am. Those things cost a fortune, too.
The Japanese will start making them. That's what happened. We'll be buying our Cadillac convertibles from Japan.
Japan? I ain't buying nothing from no Japs.
The only color Pop recognizes is white.
Well, even white people don't make things any good anymore. I bought a US-made TV because I wanted to buy American. And it broke down in 3 weeks. When the repairman came to fix it, he said all the parts were made in Japan anyway. So next time I'm going to buy one straight from Japan. Don Visser's got a car like the Major's.
Do you remember Don Visser, don't you, John?
No.
Of course you do. You went to high school right around the time you did. He went on to play with the Cowboys for 2 years.
Hell, he knows who Don Visser is. Everybody knows who Don Visser is.
Come on, Susie, let's take a look at that verse. I'll help you. Excuse me.
Can I talk to you for a minute? Oh, yeah. Excuse me. Is that home?
See, Pop? Can I have one of them cigars? Out of that. I say, can I have one of them cigars? Oh, thank you, boy.
I'm sorry about all this, mate.
That's all right, Johnny. I found him.
Who?
The man who killed my son.
I'll just get in here.
I'm in a whorehouse over in Juarez right now. There's a 4 that came into my home, and there's 8 or 10 others.
Let's go clean them up.
Johnny, come on in. Everything's ready.
I'm in the making. I'm going to go out and get some beer. We'll be back after a while.
Well, what about your dinner? Why are you wearing that thing? He never wears his uniform when I ask him to.
Bye, Dave. Bye, son.
Well, where are you going? Y'all get back here soon.
Quentin Tarantino dedicates 2 chapters of his book to John Flynn, 2 films. This one and The Outfit, which incidentally in Italian is called Organizzazione Criminale, criminal organization.
A great Italian poster too. The insert poster, a great Italian insert poster, shooting Timothy Carey in the hand.
Why do you think John Flynn never had never got the respect that he deserves critically? I mean,
I don't know. I honestly don't know. Well, okay. Like I can guess. Well, I do talk about it a little bit in the section on reviews coming straight after The Outfit. There was sort of there was a bias against genre films for the most part by a lot of, especially the American newspaper critics at the time. And I have a selection of reviews for his film, The Outfit, which is based on a Richard Stark, who's a pseudonym for Donald Westlake, on a famous known Richard Stark novel. It stars Robert Duvall, Karen Black, Jodan Baker, Robert Ryan. I mean, we're talking about really good people. This is a really good genre film with really good people. Forget about how the critics treated like actual exploitation movies with like nothing but contempt. But there was this, what's the word I use? Institutional indifference to genre cinema. And the critics tend to look down at it, and they tend to look down at filmmakers who actually understood the audiences far better than they did. And if you read these critics, judging from their, they put themselves above these films, and they put themselves above these filmmakers, which, if you actually read the reviews, is clearly not the case.
Let me go back for a second to Sam Peckinpah, because his great films of the late 60s and 70s have something in common with this. This is a revenge.
Rolling Thunder definitely has a Peckinpah influence. There is absolutely a Peckinpah
I was
influence.
thinking of Straw Dogs, for example.
Yeah.
And the reason why I mentioned Straw Dogs, Cane di Paglia in Italian with Dustin Hoffman, is because you mentioned the shrink of your school. Why is it important? Why you mention her?
Oh, well, it's just the fact that, so back then when it came to these movies, I couldn't see everything because I was still a little kid. I had to be taken by my parents, to go see something like this, or by my grandmother or something. I had to be taken. And I think we could have gone and saw Straw Dogs. We just didn't. But the trailer for Straw Dogs that they showed on TV, they showed a lot, and it sounded really good. From Sam Peckinpah, the man that brought you the Wild Bunch, comes Straw Dog. And wow, that sounds really, really cool. And so I was having sessions with a psychologist at school, in elementary school, like around 3rd grade. And, the whole thing is to get me to talk. And she was young. She was like 24, 25, 26, something like that. A young girl. And so she was seeing a lot of movies. She realized I like movies, so we just talked about movies, basically. And she had, so whenever she'd show up, I'd come in, and she goes, "Oh, so what did you see this weekend?" And I would tell her what I saw. Like, "Oh, so what did you see this weekend?" And so one of those sessions, she goes, "Oh, I saw Straw Dogs. Oh, wow, I want to see Straw Dogs. Tell me about it." All right, and so she told me all about Straw Dogs. I think she probably left out the rape. I can't be sure. All right, but she told me all about it. I mean, like, she told me the entire climax of the movie, beat for beat for beat, which is what Dustin Hoffman did.
Do you think that today would be possible to shoot a film like Straw Dogs, or even with The Wild Bunch, where William Holden kills a woman calling her a bitch before killing her?
I could do it.
You could do it.
Anybody can do it. You just got one. Anybody can do it. You just gotta do it. All right. And 2, not care what the fuck people say about it. By the way, it's not like Sam Peckinpah was short of critics in his day.
Absolutely.
They absolutely complained. And they attacked him personally and everything, and he just fucking laughed. Fuck all you all. He just, they made him want to do it more.
One more thing about Sam Peckinpah. Originally, the director attached to The Getaway was Peter Bogdanovich.
Yeah.
And you write that he was literally fired by the star, Steve McQueen, because he didn't know which kind of weapon to use in a scene. This says a lot about Steve McQueen knowing a lot about weapons, and at the same time, who really has the power in a film?
Well, it's like I'll tell that story because it's a pretty good story. So the thing about it is, the story was told to me by Walter Hill, another action maestro.
Fantastic filmmaker, Guerrieri della Notte, The Warriors.
Yeah. And see, he was the screenwriter. And so it was Peter Bogdanovich that hired Walter Hill. And so the thing about it was, Peter Bogdanovich says, okay, I'm going to do What's Up Doc with Streisand, and then when I finish What's Up Doc, then I'll do The Getaway with Steve McQueen. And so they sent Walter, and they wanted a script as soon as possible, so they sent Walter Hill over to San Francisco, where Peter Bogdanovich is doing What's Up Doc, so he can, like, you know, be writing and then, like, show Peter some stuff. So Walter Hill's on the set of What's Up Doc, watching him work. And he said that he had never seen anybody finesse actors the way that he saw Peter Bogdanovich finesse Barbra Streisand. So it'd be the morning of the shoot, and then Barbra Streisand would walk on the set buzzing like a hornet about something or other. And then Steve like, Barbara, it's okay. None of this will ever really matter. Oh, the audience is going to love you in this. They're going to think you are so funny. The audience is going to love you. The critics are going to adore you in this. I watched dailies last night. You were so funny, I practically fell out of the chair.
Can we say that this is one of...
And before you know it, she's like, you know, she's purring like a kitten. And, you know, everything that was a problem, it just magically goes away. And now she's ready to shoot. And he goes, now, that kind of talking and cajoling is actually part of the job. That's part of the job of a director, especially when it comes to dealing with your leading performers. And then Walter Hill made the point of just saying, like he's never seen anybody do it with the skill that Bogdanovich had. However, okay, so now McQueen knew that Peter Bogdanovich had to do What's Up Doc first. But now he's getting kind of fucking mad that he's got to wait around, almost like, what, I'm in the second position of Streisand? What the fuck is this shit, all right? You know, so he's starting to get mad, even though he knew what the deal was. So finally, the producers come up with the idea of having a meeting on a Sunday, just so people know that everything is going on, and what, you know, so they feel like they've done something. And Walter Hill makes a point of saying, look, to give Peter, you know, his due, he probably didn't realize how important this meeting was to the producers. He was probably just happy to have a day off, and I know what that's like. All right. So the producers and Walter Hill and Peter Bogdanovich and Steve McQueen, they all get together, and they're going to have a talk about everything. And so maybe Walter Hill's written like 25 pages by this point in time, and the producers go, so Peter, how's the script coming? Then he looks to Walter Hill. So Walter, how's the script coming? Walter goes, well, it's coming along. And they go back and forth, and they're talking, and then Steve McQueen goes, so what kind of gun do you think Doc would have? And then Peter goes, oh, Steve, that's not important now. We'll figure that out later. Don't worry about that. And Walter said you could see Steve's face when Peter said that. See, he was shining and cajoling McQueen the way he had gotten used to cajoling and shining on Barbra Streisand, but McQueen wasn't Streisand. And saying, you know, and if you're talking to McQueen about guns or ornaments or motorcycles or cars or carburetors or engines, you don't just say, oh, well, we'll deal with that later, it's not important.
Big mistake.
You know, and that was Ian Peter Bogdanovich. Now, he wasn't fired at the moment, but you could tell that McQueen lost all faith in him to do a tough guy movie. Because this is not the guy to do a tough guy movie.
By the way, do you know the Italian title of What's Up Doc? Ma papà ti manda solo. Does your father send you alone?
Well, I heard that the Italian title of Enzo G. Castorelli's Inglourious Bastards is
detto treno blindato, you're right. Let's watch now the final clip.
You see the light? The window? The light. The window up there on the second floor. The one that's closest to the edge of the building. The light in the window. The second story. Are you blind? Do you see the light? Yeah, you see it. Good. See the woman in the window? Do you see the woman in the window?
Yeah.
You see the woman? I want you to see that woman because that's my wife. That's not my apartment. It's not my apartment. You know who lives there? Huh? No, I mean, you wouldn't know who lives there. I'm just saying. But you know who lives there? Huh? A nigga lives there. Really, honey. And I'm gonna kill him. Listen. It's nothing else. I'm gonna kill him. What do you think of that? I said, what do you think about it? Don't answer. I'm not gonna tell you. I'm gonna kill him with a 44 Magnum pistol. I have a 44 Magnum pistol. I'm gonna kill him with that gun. Did you ever see with a 44 Magnum pistol into a woman's face? I'm gonna fucking destroy it. Just blow her right apart. That's what I'm gonna do to her face. Now, did you ever see what I'm gonna do to a woman's pussy? And that you should see. That you should see what a 44 Magnum is gonna do to a woman's pussy. You should see it. I know you must think.
Of course, you all have recognized Scorsese himself. Disturbing, though. In your book, you compare this film to The Searchers, Sentieri Selvaggi in Italian, Wild Paths, the great masterpiece by John Ford. Can you tell me something about this comparison? Why did you put the two films together?
Well, Paul Schrader was thinking of The Searchers when he wrote Taxi Driver, and he lucked out in finding a simpatico mind when he gave it to Scorsese, who also loved The Searchers and who saw the direct correlation, especially between both the journey of saving the girl in The Searchers, it's Natalie Wood. In the case of Taxi Driver, it's Jodie Foster, and the symbiotic relationship between Ethan Edwards' character, the John Wayne character, and the Travis Bickle character that De Niro plays. But it can go all the way down the line. Sybil Shepherd's character is very much like Betsy, is very much like Martha, the wife of his brother, the woman he can't have, and even Harvey Keitel's character Sport is sort of the urban version of Scar.
In the film, in the book, you write an entire chapter with Brian De Palma directing this film because he was the original.
Yeah. Well, he could have done it. It was definitely in his. What happened was when Schrader was a film critic, he gave Sisters a very good review, and then he followed it up with an interview with De Palma. They kind of hit it off. They can't stand each other now, but then they hit it off. And then they started playing chess, which is very interesting, to imagine Paul Schrader and Brian De Palma playing chess. And while they're playing chess, Paul Schrader says, I wrote a screenplay once. And then De Palma's like, oh God, not another one. Oh my God, oh my God. And Schrader goes, hey, you don't have to read it. I'm simply saying, I did write a screenplay once. Well, for all of De Palma's reaction, he actually did read it. And the script was Taxi Driver. And he's aware enough to know that this is a real, genuine piece of work. And so he could have been the director of it, and he knew it was good enough to make, and he did consider making it. He did consider making it, but he didn't think it would be commercial enough. And and now in later years, he said that earlier on. Now in later years, he said he thought it would be better for Marty, and so he passed it on to Marty. And he might very well have thought that, and it probably was better for Marty. But the real reason he didn't do it is he didn't think it was commercial enough. And he passed it on to Scorsese, and Scorsese did it. But there exists a reality where Brian De Palma could have made it.
We mentioned The Searchers. How do you like it? You think also is a great masterpiece of American cinema?
It's really interesting about The Searchers. I have never liked it, usually. All growing up through most of the years, I never quite understood why people liked The Searchers as much as they did. I like John Wayne in it. I think he gives a fantastic performance, and I like that character. But I don't like that. I didn't like the movie. I thought it was the kind of 50s Western I don't like, frankly, to tell you the truth. However, in writing the piece, I thought I owed it to the piece, and I owed it to myself to watch The Searchers again. Now, I almost defined myself how I didn't care for The Searchers. So I didn't expect to have a different thought about it, but I just wanted to hit myself to the intricacies of it again before I started writing. And lo and behold, after all these years of not liking the movie, I put it on and I kind of got it. I actually enjoyed it. I liked the sense of community that it captured. I liked this, the kind of desperateness of this white people community clan trying to hold on to some of their traditions in this hostile environment. And while I never really cared that much for Jeffrey Hunter in the movie, I do like his place in the story. I do like the character in the story. And the John Wayne's even better than I remember being.
Is there another classic that you don't like, or you still don't like? A film that everybody loves and you don't?
Yeah, I don't like Chinatown.
Chinatown?
Yeah.
I love Chinatown. Why you don't like it?
Well, I like Jack Nicholson in it. He's really good. And I like the screenplay for the first three.
By Robert Town.
Robert Town. I like the screenplay for the first 3 acts. But I think it's kind of a bummer, frankly, and it doesn't really need to be. I think it lacks energy. I think it's too slow. And when I say too slow, I don't mean there should be more action scenes. I just think it should be livelier. And I know Robert Town would have made it livelier. And Jack Nicholson is doing what he can, but everything, I think Polanski makes the film just too gloomy. And I don't like the ending that either Robert Town wrote, and I don't like the ending that Polanski did. And the stuff that Polanski shot in Chinatown, I think is just terrible. It looks that sequence is so badly done. It looks like, everyone remembers the line, but the sequence...
Forget it, Jack, is Chinatown.
Yeah, but the sequence is so badly done, it's as if they shot all day long, and then they had this new scene, and at the end of the day, they go there and then just shoot it. You just look at Jack Nicholson during that scene. It doesn't look like he thinks it's going to make the movie. One last thing about Chinatown, all right? And by the way, I know none of you agree with me about this, all right? I'm okay with that, all right? And I'm not trying to convince anybody to not like it. I'm just saying I don't care for it. I didn't write about it in here, all right? But one of the things that was constant back in the 80s when revival houses is Chinatown would show at revival houses all the time. And so it was usually, Chinatown and another Nicholson film. So Chinatown and 5 Easy Pieces. Chinatown and The Last Detail. Chinatown and this one or that one. Or it was Chinatown and some other neo-noir that had come out, that was playing at the time. And in every single case, the other movie is far more lively than Chinatown. Every single case, the other movie has this punch and this power that Chinatown just doesn't have.
when I had the great privilege of hosting a similar event a year and a half ago in Rome, I asked him what is Quentin Tarantino's favorite film, and he gave me at least 20 different answers. But always the good, the bad, and the ugly was in the top list.
Oh, the good and the bad. I think it's the greatest movie ever made. Okay.
One of the films that influenced you the most, or at least you liked the most when you saw it, was Rocky. But in the film, in the book, you say that you prefer Rocky 2 to Rocky 1.
I actually do prefer Rocky 2, yeah.
Can you share with the audience why you prefer Rocky 2?
Yeah, well, one, I actually like Stallone as a director more than John Alvinson, even though I'm not putting John Alvinson down. He did a good job with Rocky. He directed Joe. He does a great job with Joe. But I really like what Stallone did with Rocky 2 as a movie. But also, there also is a really interesting thing going on in Rocky, because in the first Rocky, Stallone is telling his story. You know, Rocky is a ham and egg fighter, and I think Stallone thought of himself as a ham and egg actor. All right, just getting this part here and that part there. And Rocky getting a chance to fight a Muhammad Ali-like character like Apollo Creed for the World Championship, is pretty much the equivalent of Stallone starring in a major studio feature film as the lead. So there's this whole parallel with his life and the character of Rocky. Well, then Rocky comes out and Stallone becomes a big superstar. And it's like, it's just a sensation. But then, people get really big, and then eventually the backlash started coming at Stallone. And his next couple of films, Fist and Paradise Alley, he wasn't able to quite follow up the success with Rocky. So see, the guy the only thing he can do is play a dumb boxer. And then everybody was calling him, people felt complete need to make fun of him and say that he's just a flash in the pan, he's never going to be anything special, da-da-da-da-da. It's over. It was luck. The guy was just lucky. Well, that's pretty much the story of Rocky 2. Is after Rocky 2 comes out, in Rocky 2, after the championship fight, then as time, it makes Rocky a big celebrity for a while, but then, he's not a really good fighter, that was just a thing that happened, he was just lucky, he's not really any good, so one thing that's kind of cool is in Rocky 2, when he actually fights Apollo Creed, it's kind of for the money, all right? He needs the cash. So Stallone is able to tell his story again through Rocky 2. But even more important is the story of Apollo Creed, which actually manages to be Stallone's story as well, because Apollo Creed is attacked, all right, in the press in Rocky 2. And there is this aspect that probably mirrors Stallone, Apollo Creed reading hate mail, and then you can imagine Stallone, you're reading Pauline Kael's terrible review of Paradise Alley, stomping around his mansion just as mad as Apollo Creed is. I was just saying it to my face. In the case of Rocky 2, Stallone is able to put himself in both shoes, both Rocky's shoes and Apollo Creed's shoes. I think that's pretty deep.
Feel free not to respond. There is a rumor that your next movie will be on Pauline Kael.
No. No, I'm happy to respond. No, that was just complete, utter speculation. These guys at Variety and Hollywood Reporter, they get one little kernel of truth, and then they speculate, and then 150 articles come out about it. No, it is about a film critic, but it's not about Pauline Kael.
In the book you mentioned how you dislike the films from the 80s, and you also compare to the 50s. Why do you think these two decades, of course with few exceptions, are generally not so interesting?
Well, that's one of the sections I intend to read, all right, during the reading, so let me hold off for that.
Okay. but I don't know if you will read this. Let's see eventually. But one of the funniest moments in the book when you mentioned the Scarlet Letter.
Okay.
Will you read that?
I actually will read that, but we'll bring it up.
The Scarlet Letter, the film version, directed by Roland Joffé with Demi Moore, has a happy ending. And
the triumphant ending version.
and when Demi Moore was interviewed,
when they asked Demi Moore about it, so how do you feel about changing the ending of such a famous book? And she was like, well, not many people have read the book. Well, there you go. Yeah, welcome to Hollywood.
Paradise Alley. He loves Paradise Alley, and he makes a point very strong, very convincing. But the most interesting thing is he writes that Sylvester Stallone is the best director with whom Sylvester Stallone, the actor, worked.
Yeah, I look at what I do agree with that. All right. Now the thing is, but he can work with a lot of great directors, so that's not like this giant thing. All right. Let me put it like this: Stallone is definitely the best director for Stallone that Stallone ever worked with. You go, well, what about John Huston when he did Stallone did Victory? Okay, well, John Huston didn't really do a great job with Victory. John Huston was like asleep in the chair half the time.
So Robert Altman, but he's there for 10 seconds in The Last Goodbye. In The Long Goodbye, sorry. And why do you like so much Paradise Alley?
Well, I'm making a point in the book. Like, I really enjoy Paradise Alley. I've enjoyed it for a long time. I don't quite like it the way I liked it when I was a kid. All right, when it came out. Because I was just a big, Stallone fan, and I do think that the whole film burns with a passion. It burns with a passion, and it's you can tell it's everything Stallone had always wanted to do. You can tell it's his first real script, and it's all these images he had in his head. It's all these things that he thought would be cool and would be fun. And it has this kind of big sentimentality about it, but it also has this kind of face on the barroom floor, kind of aspect. But it really enjoys its milieu, and it enjoys the fire escapes and the trash cans and jumping on tenement roofs, and then the whole Damon Runyon-esque type aspect of it all.
Before leaving the stage to Quentin for his reading, my last question is about Daisy Miller, which was a total disaster at the box office, directed by Peter Bogdanovich. But you love it.
I really do like that movie a lot.
What do you like about it? It's based on Henry James, a short story.
Yeah, well, one, I think the movie's very powerful. Yeah. And it has a devastating ending. I mean, one of the best gut punch endings you could ever see. And I'm almost ruining it by saying that, because if you don't know what's going to happen, it really takes you unawares.
Why do you think it went so bad at the box office? Because of the ending?
No. I just think people just weren't ready to see that type of a period piece. Nor were they ready to necessarily see it from Peter Bogdanovich. They kind of wanted, he was kind of used to doing comedies at that time. But I don't think people necessarily wanted to see Sybil Shepherd play that kind of role. But you don't. There's not a lot of studio films coming out like that. There's stuff like that coming out of England. Mary Queen of Scots, or Far from the Madding Crowd. All right, but not coming out of America. But one of the things I do appreciate in it, but it actually takes a moment for it to settle, is it's not done the way people do great literature novels now, or even the way they did them then. When John Schlesinger does Far from the Madding Crowd, no, he's doing Henry James. That's the idea, all right, is to capture something that's on the page, capture the writing and dramatize it. And there is that aspect. Even when they do, well, anyway, so that, there is that. So, but that's not where Bogdanovich is coming from. Bogdanovich is coming from much more of a old Hollywood studio version. When studios would do The Heiress. No, they take this great novel and then they turn it into a good movie. So it's not about capturing the novel. It's about taking the good story, put some good movie stars in there, and make it a punchy movie. And so it's closer to Garbo's Anna Karenina. It's closer to Ronald Coleman's Tale of Two Cities, or it's not Charlotte Bronte's Wuthering Heights. It's Laurence Olivier's Wuthering Heights, and it's and done for a lot of the same reasons. It's a good role for an actress who he thinks would do a really good job of the part. And it's very breezy in that regard. He shoots it like it's a comedy.
If I have time for a very last question. This is a book about great filmmakers, but a lot of unsung films and unsung heroes. Among them, Barry Brown. You want to say something about him? Because I think it's quite unknown. He died very young, 27?
Yeah, 27, I think.
27.
Yeah.
He's in Daisy Miller.
Yeah, he's the. If you've read the book, he plays Frederick Winterborn in it. He's the suitor who's kind of chasing after Daisy Miller through the whole film. He was a young Andrew Prime-like ingenue, male ingenue at that time, kind of a soft leading man. And he had done a lot of television bits, Mod Squad and Ironside, shows like that. And then he had a really good part in a lead part in Robert Benton's first movie, Bad Company, with him and Jeff Bridges, and they're quite good together. And this was sort of his follow-up role. And one of the things that's really terrific about the movie, one, I think it's one of the best performances in any of Bogdanovich's films, because the thing you could say about Sybil Shepherd playing Daisy Miller is that maybe she's too modern for this big, lavish period piece. But that kind of works for the movie, because almost the whole point of the story is Daisy Miller is too modern for American expatriate Rome, Roman high society. And that's almost the point, of the story. And she also, like I said, Bogdanovich kind of turns the dialogue into Howard Hawks' fast, rapid fire kind of dialogue. And Sybil Shepherd has a good facility for that. But part of the reason that Sybil Shepherd's able to get away with it so well is Barry Brown is absolutely, perfectly period appropriate for the film. And I make a point, it's as if he's frozen in a Chagall painting, and he steps out of the painting, and then does the movie, and then steps back into the painting when the film is over. And he was a very, very interesting actor, but that was as far as that was as high as it ever got for him. After that, he did a couple other things, but basically he found himself back on television, and he was guesting on TV shows. And in 1978, I believe, he took his own life. And there's something about the real power at the end of Daisy Miller is you're left thinking about the lead character in this kind of profound way. And you're made to think about how the other characters feel about that. But then at the end of watching the movie Daisy Miller, I had the similar feelings about Barry Brown.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen. E poi Tarantino leggerà alcuni brani del suo libro. Grazie a tutti.
I'm going to come back and I'm going to do some fantastic job tonight. Give him a hand. But this theater, Maron, this theater. Okay, so we're going to do something a little different tonight than we do. Normally I read a chapter, just read a whole chapter from the book. Here, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just read different excerpts from different sections of the book. Never quite done this before this way. We'll see how it happens. Maybe I will never do it again. We'll find out. All right? So just bear with me a little bit, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a few different I've got a few things marked here that I'm going to read. What I'll do is I'll set this timer for 30 minutes. And I'll read different excerpts. I'll give you a little bit of a heads up about what I'm going to be talking about. When the bell rings, I stop reading. No matter what I was saying, no matter where I was going, I'm going to stop dead. Okay, so not to waste time, I'll set up. So the first excerpt I'm going to read is from chapter 1. And the chapter is called Little Q Goes to Big Movies. And this furthers what we were talking about my parents taking me at a very, very young age to see a lot of these really wild adult movies surrounded by a bunch of adults that no other children that I knew were seeing. So this will carry on from that thought. But first, oh, by the way, my mother's name is Connie and my stepfather's name is Kurt. That might come out. My young parents went to a lot of movies around this time and usually brought me along. I'm sure they could have found somebody to pawn me off on. My grandma Dorothy was usually gay. But instead they allowed me to tag along. A part of the reason I was allowed to tag along was because I knew how to keep my mouth shut. During the daytime, I was allowed to be a normal, annoying kid. Ask dumb questions, be childish, be selfish, like most children. But if they took me out at night to a nice restaurant or a bar, which they did sometimes because Kurt was a piano bar musician, or a nightclub, which they also did from time to time, or the movies, or even on a double date with another couple, I knew this was adult time. If I wanted to be allowed to hang around during adult time, my little ass better be fucking cool. Which basically meant, don't ask dumb questions. Don't think the evening's about you. It's not. The adults are there to talk to each other and laugh and joke. It was my job to shut up and let them without constant childish interruption. I knew no one truly cared, unless it was cute, about any observation I had about the movie we saw or the evening itself. It's not like if I broke these rules I was treated harshly, but I was encouraged to act mature and well-behaved. Because if I acted like a childish pain in the ass, I'd be left at home with a babysitter while they went out and had a good time. I don't want to stay at home. I want to go out with them. I want to be part of adult time. In some ways, I was like a child version of Grizzly Man, able to observe grown-ups at night in their natural habitats. It was in my best interest to keep my mouth shut and eyes and ears open. This is what adults did when they weren't around children. This is how adults socialized. This is what they talked about when they were with each other. This is the shit they liked to do. This is the shit they found funny. I don't know if it was my mother's intention or not, but they were teaching me how adults socialize with each other. When they took me to the movies, it was my job to sit and watch the movie, whether I liked it or not. Yes, some of those adult movies were fucking amazing. And some, to an 8 or 9-year-old, were fucking boring. But I knew while they were watching but I knew while they were watching the movie, no one cared whether or not I was having a good time. I'm sure early on at some point I must have said something like, "Hey Mom, this is boring." And I'm sure she said back something like, "Look, Quentin, if you're going to be a pain in the ass when we take you out for an evening, next time we'll leave you at home with a babysitter. If you'd rather stay at home and watch TV while me and your father go out and have a good time, fine. That's what we'll do next time. You decide." Well, I decided. I wanted to go out with them. And the first rule, don't be a pain in the ass. Second rule, during the movie, don't ask stupid questions. Maybe one or two at the beginning of the movie, but after that, I was on my own. Any other questions would have to wait till the movie was over. And for the most part, I was able to follow this rule. Though there were some exceptions. My mom would recount to her friends about the time they took me to see Carnal Knowledge. Art Garfunkel is trying to talk Candace Bergen into sex. And their dialogue back and forth was something like, "Come on, let's do it." "I don't want to do it." "You promised you'd do it." "I don't want to do it. Everybody else is doing it." And apparently, in my squeakiest 9-year-old voice, I asked loudly, "What do they want to do, Mom?" Which, according to my mother, made the theater full of adults burst out laughing. Also, I found the iconic freeze-frame ending of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid too obscure. So, end happens. What happened? I remember asking. "Well, they died." My mom informed me. "They died?" "Yes, Quentin, they died." "Well, how do you know?" Because when it froze, that was what that was meant to imply. "Well, how do you know?" "I just know." "Well, why didn't they show it?" Clearly losing her patience. "Because they didn't want to." Then I grumbled under my breath, "They should have shown it." And despite how iconic that image has become, I still agree with me. They should have shown it. But usually I knew enough that while my mom and dad were watching the movie, it wasn't the time to bombard them with questions. I knew I was watching adult movies, and some things I wouldn't understand. But me understanding the lesbian relationship between Sandy Dennis and Anne Haywood in The Fox wasn't what was important. My parents having a good time, and me spending time with them when they were out for the evening, that was what was important. I knew the time to ask questions was on the drive home, after the movie was over. When a child reads an adult book, there's going to be words they don't understand. But depending on the context and the paragraph surrounding the sentence, sometimes they can figure it out. Same thing when a kid watches an adult movie. Now, obviously, some things that go over your head, your parents want to go over your head. But some things, even if I didn't exactly know what they meant, I got the gist. Especially jokes that made the room full of adults laugh. It was fucking thrilling to be the only child in a packed room of adults watching an adult movie and hearing the room laugh at, usually, something I knew was probably naughty. And sometimes, even when I didn't get it, I kind of got it. Even though I didn't really know what a rubber was, by the way the audience laughed, I still more or less got the idea during the scene between Hermie and the druggist in Summer of 42. Same thing with most of the sex jokes in Al and the Pussycat. I laughed at that movie with the adult audience from beginning to end. But when it came to the movies I just mentioned, there was something else about the adults' reaction I couldn't have pinpointed at the time, but I realize now. See, if you show children a movie with a guy cursing in a funny way, or a poop joke, or a fart joke, usually they giggle. And when they get a little older, you show them a movie with a sex joke, they'll giggle at that. But the type of laugh they do is a naughty laugh. They know that this is inappropriate, and they know maybe they shouldn't be hearing or seeing this. And the laugh reveals that they feel a touch naughty partaking in the exchange. Well, in 1970 and 71, that's how adult audiences responded to the sexual humor in films like Where's Papa, or The Owl and the Pussycat, and MASH, and Pretty Maids All in a Row, Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice, or the pot brownie scene in I Love You, Alice B. Topaz, or when the football players smoked a joint on the bench in MASH, or scenes that had a comic sting but wouldn't have been possible a year or two earlier, like Joe's introduction scene, or Popeye Doyle's bar roast in French Connection. The laughter from the grown-ups had a similar naughty vibe, which in retrospect makes sense, because these adults weren't used to seeing this type of material. These were the first couple of years of New Hollywood, These audiences had grown up on movies from the 50s and 60s. They were used to peekaboo, insinuation, double entendre, and wordplay. So, in a strange way, the adults and I were kind of on the same page. Okay, that's that. Thank you very much. And now I'm going to expand more on what we were talking about when it comes to new Hollywood versus old Hollywood, okay? In Peter Biskin's historical examination of New Hollywood in the 70s, Easy Rider Raging Bulls, he relates a story of Dennis Hopper, fresh off of his Easy Rider success, having dinner with Peter Bogdanovich and his wife Polly Platt and legendary old Hollywood director George Cukor. During the dinner, Hopper apparently mocked the old man's generation, saying, "We're gonna bury you, man." With we, meaning Dennis and his anti-establishment brethren, and you, meaning Cukor and the rest of the grumpy old farts still making movies at the end of the 60s. Bogdanovich and Platt were shocked and horrified to see this old master, whose work they had revered, treated with such an alarming lack of respect. "I hated Dennis for that," Peter told me decades later. And if the story went down how it's been told, Hopper deserved a punch in the nose. Nevertheless, it does illustrate the attitude that Dennis's hippie Hollywood had about old Hollywood as it gave way to new Hollywood. These new filmmakers had an anti-establishment perspective. To them, John Ford, John Wayne, and Howard Hawks were the establishment. Charlton Heston was the establishment. Julie Andrews was the establishment. And since My Fair Lady was definitely the establishment, so too was George Cukor. The post-60s anti-establishment auteurs had just won a revolution. The old studio Broadway musical-based extravaganza was finally at long last dead. Many filmmakers today can't wait for the day they can say that about the superhero movies. The Hays Code was dead and the ratings board was alive. You could make a movie about any subject, practically, and the material wouldn't have to be compromised. The peekaboo parlor games when it came to sexuality that Hitchcock was forced to play could be a thing of the past. And if you made it, thanks to the ratings board, the distributor could release it across the country without some hick sheriff in some jerkwater county claiming he broke their obscenity laws. These anti-establishment auteurs were as sorry to see the old studio system go bust as the French revolutionaries were to see Marie Antoinette vacate Versailles. And I'm not going to go through the whole list of the filmmakers, but there's a few of them, all right, that represent these guys. These were the Hollywood Hills hippies, the Malibu Beach beatniks. And it was the foreign directors of the 50s and the 60s, plus Orson Welles, that made them want to be filmmakers. But it was the counterculture that had made them want to be artists. After the devastation of Europe and Asia during World War II, once countries started making movies again, they found that they were making them for a much more adult audience than existed before the war. And world cinema proceeded to get more and more adult as the 50s turned into the 60s. However, in America, despite the best efforts of men like Stanley Kramer and Otto Preminger, Hollywood movies still remain stubbornly immature and committed to the idea of fun for the whole family. But with the rise of the 60s counterculture, the explosion of a youth culture movement, the new maturity that was introduced to popular music, and the excitement generated by films like Bonnie and Clyde, The Graduate, and especially the surprise success of Dennis Hopper's Easy Rider, a new Hollywood was ushered in. An adult-oriented Hollywood, a Hollywood with a 60s sensibility and an anti-establishment agenda. And by 1970, this new Hollywood, was Hollywood. And the films left over from that other sensibility, like Billy Wilder's The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, or Blake Edwards' Darling Lily, or Alfred Hitchcock's Topaz, or Howard Hawks' Rio Lobo, were deemed dead on arrival. And except for the Edwards and Wilder's films, those films were dead on arrival. But the attitude of both the hit critics and the audience of the day wasn't that much different from Dennis Hopper at that infamous dinner. Fuck George Cukor. Fuck George Stevens. Fuck William Wyler. Fuck Howard Hawks.
Like the movie brat generation that came after them, these anti-establishment auteurs watched old movies growing up too. But unlike Bogdanovich, Spielberg, Scorsese, and Big John Milius, when this era of filmmakers watched old movies on television, they weren't as enamored of what they saw. When they watched John Ford Westerns, they were usually appalled by the jingoistic white supremacy on display. When they watched The Searchers, they didn't see a conflicted man trying to find his place in a society that had outlived his usefulness. They saw a movie about an Indian-hating racist bastard who was ultimately offered absolution by a grateful white community. And they saw a director who co-signed that absolution and expected the audience to do the same. They rejected the morality of the wrap-up at the end of Ford's Fort Apache, where Henry Ford's genocidal cavalry officer is lionized in death for the greater good of the cavalry, esprit de corps, and for white America as a whole. The anti-establishment auteurs wanted to remake John Ford movies, but not the way Scorsese and Schrader would do with Taxi Driver and Hardcore. They wanted to remake Fort Apache from the Apache's perspective. And in the case of Arthur Penn with Little Big Man, Ralph Nelson with Soldier Blue, and Robert Aldrich with Ozana's Raid, they did. The reason to do historical pictures in this new climate was to finally examine and demonstrate America's history of fascism, racism, and hypocrisy. All the elements that old Hollywood spent 50 years whitewashing in the historical pictures of old. Jesse James wasn't Henry King's dashing tyro of power. He was Robert Duvall's homicidal religious fanatic in Philip Kaufman's The Great Northfield, Minnesota Raid. Billy the Kid wasn't Johnny Mac Brown's smiling charmer, or even Paul Newman's broody method acting turn in The Left-Handed Gun. He was Michael J. Pollard's creepy little punk in Stan Dragatti's Dirty Little Billy, or Chris Christopherson's Billy in Sam Peckinpah's Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, a Billy who slays with all the callousness of a modern-day serial killer. General George Armstrong Custer wasn't Errol Flynn's long-haired, hard-drinking, two-fisted hero. He was Richard Mulligan's racial cleansing nincompoop in Arthur Penn's Little Big Man. Wyatt Earp wasn't Burt Lancaster. Wyatt Earp wasn't Burt Lancaster's ramrod, straight lawman. He was Harris Yulin's fascist cop in Frank Perry's Doc. In Perry's version of events, there wasn't so much a gunfight at the OK Corral, then Wyatt and his brothers just murdered the Clantons in cold blood. And the reason is made abundantly clear: power and money. During times of great political turmoil, modern political issues are always conveniently found in America's past. When Arthur Penn, Robert Aldrich, and Ralph Nelson take on the subject of the American Indian Wars, every parallel with the war in Vietnam is encouraged, to the extent that Penn even cast an Asian woman to play Hoffman's American Indian bride, who's savagely slaughtered by the cavalry wearing blue coats in Little Big Man. Just in case it's not obvious to everyone. And Abraham Polanski's Tell Them Willie Boy is here. Robert Blake's outlaw Indian on the run for a self-defense murder represents a modern-day Black Panther political fugitive. And Robert Redford's golden-haired posse-leading marshal represents the older white male Western archetype. And just in case we don't get it, he's named Coop, as in Gary Cooper. Unlike the movie brats who followed them, these filmmakers didn't want to do their version of Psycho, Dressed to Kill, or The Searchers, Taxi Driver, or Little Caesar, Godfather, or Flash Gordon, Star Wars, or Bringing a Baby, What's Up, Doc? When these directors would redo films, it's films in the spirit of Fellini and Truffaut and Renoir. That's what they aspired to. The first half of the new Hollywood 70s seemed to want to test the limits of both its newfound freedom and the type of edgy material it was allowed to make. And that's why cinema lovers still enjoy discovering those films to this day. But to the casual moviegoer, who didn't know the difference between New Hollywood and Old Hollywood, and lived someplace other than New York City, Los Angeles, San Francisco, or a college campus, all they knew was, if you see a movie, you kind of like to understand it. Did they understand 2001? How about Catch-22? How about Brewster McCloud? How about Little Murders? Without a critic to tell them what to think, did they understand Five Easy Pieces? Did they misunderstand Joe? You see a movie, you want to like the hero. Do you like Jeff Bridges and Sam Waterston in Rancho Deluxe? Well, of course not, they're assholes. You like Donald Sutherland's Hawkeye in MASH, but do you like Sutherland's Alex in Alice in Wonderland? Are are we even supposed to? Or work from the expectation that there will be a hero? Is McCabe a hero? Is Travis Bickle? Is Major Charlie Rain? Is Elliot Gould's Philip Marlowe? Are Freebie and the Bean? Is Warren Beatty's George Roundy in Shampoo? Now, I'm not just making fun of people back then who didn't get it. I'm making fun of people now. I screened Shampoo to an Oscar-winning screenwriter who had never seen it. And when it was over, her response was, "So it's just about a guy who's trying to open up a hair salon." And yeah, I'm having a good laugh at Callie Corey's expense, but she isn't the only person to say that. The casual moviegoer knew movies had rougher language than before. But that doesn't mean they were ready for the last detail. They knew movies were more violent now. They liked that True Grit was rougher than the usual John Wayne Western. They liked the street realism of The French Connection. They liked it when Dustin Hoffman's Worm Turns and Straw Dogs. And they liked Dirty Harry shooting Black Panthers while he chewed on a hot dog. But that doesn't mean they were ready for the throat-slitting scene in The Wild Bunch, or the singing in the rain scene in A Clockwork Orange, or the male sodomy rape in Deliverance, or the climax of Joe. Audiences like the new risque elements in movies like Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice, and The Owl and the Pussycat, and Shampoo. They liked the funny discussions of sex in Summer of 42, and they thought it was funny when Hot Lips got exposed in the shower in Math. But that didn't mean they were ready for the tushy scene in Where's Papa, where Ruth Gordon bites George Segal on the ass. And were they disturbed, aroused, or both by Susan George's rape and Sam Peckinpah's Straw Dogs? And if they were they disturbed right away, or only at the end? And was that the disturbing part? Sequences like these instilled a growing sense of anxiety at what audiences may be subjected to inside of a darkened theater with a room full of strangers. I mean, if you bought a ticket to Russ Meyer's Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, you probably had a good idea what you were getting into. But most audiences who bought a ticket to see Deliverance didn't know they paid money to see Ned Beatty get fucked in the ass. Audiences who didn't live in New York or Los Angeles, or didn't read the New York Times or the New Yorker or the Village Voice, began to become afraid of modern movies. After a steady diet of certain kind of movies, regular moviegoers were becoming weary of modern American movies. The darkness, the drug use, the embrace of sensation, the violence, the sex, and the sexual violence. But even more than that, they became weary of the anti-everything cynicism. As Pauline Kael suggested at the beginning of the decade, are the best movies suggesting the only sensible recourse for Americans is to get stoned? Was everything a bummer? Was everything a drag? Was every movie about some guy with problems? For hip audiences, the hero dying futilely at the end of the picture was a come-on. It reaffirmed their pose. You can't win. When Robert Blake and Stacy Keach died at the end of Electric Light and Blue and The New Centurions, and when Fonda and Hopper bought it in Easy Rider, it was senseless and tragically ironic. But that felt good, because it reaffirmed the senselessness and the tragic irony of American life. The senselessness of their death made them heroes. In the first half of the 70s, you weren't a hero for fighting a war overseas and killing a bunch of enemy soldiers. You were a hero if you fought the war, went back home, and got shot in a liquor store robbery. Okay, grazie. Now, we talked about Rocky II a little earlier. Now I'm going to talk about Rocky. First, when Rocky came out, it became practically my favorite movie of all time. Now, I'm aware I've said that a few times now, but that was the 70s. I was a young, enthusiastic movie geek during a time when movies were fucking incredible. But unless you were there in 1976, it's pretty hard to get across the impact that the film Rocky had on audiences. Everything about Rocky took audiences by complete surprise. The unknown guy in the lead, how emotional the film ended up being, that incredibly stirring score by Bill Conti, and one of the most dynamic climaxes most of us had ever experienced in a cinema. I've been to movies before where something happened on screen and the audience cheered. But never, and I repeat, never, like they cheered when Rocky landed that blow in the first round that knocked Apollo Creed to the floor. The entire theater had been watching the fight with their hearts choking their throat, expecting the worst. Every blow Rocky took seemed to land on you. The smugness of Apollo Creed's superiority over this ham and egg bum seemed like the repudiation of Rocky's humanity, a humanity that both Stallone and the movie had spent the last 90 minutes making us fall in love with. Then suddenly, with one powerful swing, boom! Apollo Creed was knocked to the floor on his back. I saw that film around 7 or so times at the theaters, and every single time during that moment, the audience practically hit the ceiling. But no time was like that first time. In 1976, I didn't need to be told how involving movies could be. I knew. In fact, I didn't know much else. But until then, I had never been as emotionally invested in a lead character as I was with Rocky Balboa, and by extension, his creator, Sylvester Stallone. Now, that type of audience innocence would be practically impossible to duplicate for somebody just discovering the movie today. One, they'd have to contend with Stallone's subsequent celebrity and career. And I don't say that as a dig or a snarky comment. But the Planet Hollywood Stallone is not the Stallone who sat on Diana Shore's couch spinning witty stories about his hungry years. You can't pretend we don't live in a world where 8 movies feature the character of Rocky, and 5 movies feature Stallone's other franchise character, Rambo, sit on shelves of long-ago boarded-up video stores alongside cassettes for Cobra and Over the Top. But the real reason that the film Rocky could never have the impact it did in 1976 is because to have that same impact, you had to live through the tough, gritty, downbeat, pessimistic films of the early 70s to be floored by the feel-good catharsis of Rocky. You had to live in a world where a movie like Papillon was a Hollywood blockbuster, where even crowd-pleasing comedies like The Longest Yard included the brutal death of characters, and a Hollywood that had forsaken the old Hollywood happy ending as bullshit propaganda from the man. When the senseless death of your hero at the climax was the vogue, when even popular audience movies like 3 Days of the Condor counted on a certain amount of cynicism and paranoia from the popcorn eaters. The closest thing to a feel-good movie in the early 70s was revenge films. The closest I came to an audience cheering like we did in Rocky was George Kennedy and William Devane blowing the fuck out of the killers that murdered their families in The Human Factor and Rolling Thunder. Human Factor, an Italian film. I remember before seeing Stallone's being at some neighborhood kid's house and a TV spot for Rocky came on, and the kid wondered out loud, "What's that?" And his mother glanced at the TV and said dismissively, "Oh, it's just another movie about some guy and his problems." Today it's very easy to romanticize that cynical 70s era, especially since it's long gone, seemingly never to return. But from 1970 to at least 1977, every other movie that came out did seem like it was about some guy and his problem. Part of the elation tied to the audience response to the climactic fight in Rocky was after 5 years of 70s cinema, we didn't really expect things to work out for Balboa. And I don't mean we didn't expect him to win the heavyweight championship of the world. I mean, he was never gonna fucking win. We just hoped he didn't look like a fucking joke. That's why the ending was so surprisingly moving and cathartic. That's why when he knocked Apollo Creed flat on his back, we hit the roof. Because from that point on, no matter whatever else happened, Rocky proved he wasn't a joke. But by the time you get to that last round, and Rocky has Apollo Creed on the ropes, hitting him with a left and a right and a left and a right, and the crowd is chanting, "Rocky! Rocky!" Oh my fucking God! There has simply never been anything like it. Okay. This might end up being the last piece. This is what was brought up about the 80s. So this is me talking about, after talking forever about the 70s, this is me talking about the 80s. And I'm using it in conjunction to talk about the character of the Richard Starr character of Parker, that's in the movie The Outfit, and also he's the lead character in the Lee Marvin movie Point Blank. The thing about the character in the books, which I discovered in the 80s, is he's this professional robber who's really quite vicious and quite brutal. But I love the character. Thought he was terrific. When I first discovered Parker, what made the character so memorable was he served as an antidote to the horrible, homogenous movies Hollywood was making in the 80s. After growing up in that anything goes 70s, the 80s marked a play it safe decade, like that other horrible decade for Hollywood movies, the 50s. But the 80s were even worse. In the 50s, you could claim that it was a repressed society that imposed restrictions on Hollywood, their movies, and their artists. But in the 80s, the restrictions Hollywood imposed on their own product was self-imposed. And the harshest censorship is self-censorship. It doesn't always come from the big bad studios either. Many filmmakers water down their own vision right from the beginning. The idea that an American studio film of 1986 could have an opening scene like Pedro Almodovar's Spanish film Matador, where a character masturbates to a montage of the goriest scenes in slasher films, was unthinkable. Elizabeth McNeil's novella, 9.5 Weeks, was barely a book, but it did have a certain something. It was racing. Want me to finish? Elizabeth McNeil's novella, 9.5 Weeks, was barely a book, but it did have a certain something. It was racy, naughty, and fun. And inside of its slim page count, it suggested an even better movie. You can imagine Radley Metzger making a classic out of it in the early days of 70s erotica. But the movie Adrian Lyne made was scared of even that pipsqueak of a book. And if anybody complained he didn't do justice to the book, he could legitimately say, they practically hung me for what I did make. And he was right. They practically did. De Palma was drawn and quartered for his toothless porn satire Body Double, causing him to retreat to the silly mob comedy Wise Guys. When it came to artists whose work was of an uncompromising nature in the 80s, you had David Lynch, Paul Verhoeven, Abel Ferrara, Terry Gilliam, Brian De Palma, sometimes, and David Cronin. And that's it. Yeah, there were one-offs, but aside from Clive Barker and Hellraiser, these directors were usually punished for their perceived transgressions by the press, the public, and the industry. I remember when I worked at my Manhattan Beach video store, Video Archives, and talked to the other employees about the types of movies I wanted to make and the things I wanted to do inside of those movies. And I would use the example of the opening of Almodovar's Matador. And their response would be, Quentin, they won't let you do that. To which I replied back, who the fuck are they? Who the fuck are they? Who the fuck are they to stop me? And they can go fuck themselves. Now, I wasn't a professional filmmaker back then. I was a brash, know-it-all film geek. Yet, once I graduated to professional filmmaker, I never did let they stop me. Viewers can accept my work or reject it, deem it good, bad, or with indifference. But I've always approached my cinema with a fearlessness of the eventual outcome. A fearlessness that comes to me naturally. I mean, who cares? It's only a movie. But at the right age, mid-20s, and at the right time, fucking 80s, the fearlessness is demonstrated by Pedro Almodovar led by example. As I watched my heroes, the American film mavericks of the 70s, knuckle under to a new way of doing business just to stay employed, Pedro's fearlessness made a mockery of their calculated compromises. My dreams of movies always included a comic reaction to unpleasantness, similar to the connection that Almodovar's films made between the unpleasant and the sensual. Sitting in a Beverly Hills art house cinema, watching Pedro's vividly colorful, thrillingly provocative 35mm images flickering on a giant wall demonstrated there could be something sexy about violence. I was convinced there was a place for me and my violent reveries in the modern cinematheque. I don't even know.